When God finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him 2 tablets of the covenant, tablets of stone, written with the finger of God. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took these from them, formed them in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf, and have worshipped it, and sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" The Lord said to Moses, "I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And of you I will make a great nation." But Moses implored the Lord his God, and said, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth'? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, 'I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever.'" And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain, carrying the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hands, tablets that were written on both sides, written on the front and on the back. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved upon the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There is a noise of war in the camp." But he said, "It is not the sound made by victors or the sound made by losers. It is the sound of singing that I hear. As soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets from his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made, burned it with fire, ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you, that you have brought so great a sin upon them?" And Aaron said, "Do not let the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, that they are wicked. They said to me, 'Make gods for us, who shall go before us.' As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So I said to them, "Whoever has gold, take it off." So they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. I have noted many times on this podcast that the general consensus among historians and biblical scholars is that the mass exodus of people from Egypt, as described in the Bible, didn't happen. I won't go over the reasons why they think that, but I'll certainly provide some of the reasons in the show notes. But if that is the case, it does raise the question of why they even told some of these stories. I mean, if there was not some great mass of people at the foot of Mount Sinai who started to have religious orgies around a golden calf that they had made while Moses was up on top of the mountain chatting with God, why did they bother remembering such a thing? The answer is that the story of their emancipation from Egypt, the empire that had once ruled over the territory of Canaan, was one of the founding myths of the people of Israel. And a nation's founding myths exist for a very particular purpose. They are stories that a people return to again and again. They retell these stories as a way of figuring out what to think and feel and how to respond to contemporary events. Just like the people of Great Britain retell the stories of King Arthur, and the Americans retell the stories of George Washington, or, let's be honest here, of the Marvel and DC Comics universes, to interpret what's going on in the world right now, they continue to reinterpret the stories of Moses, Aaron, and the wanderings in the desert. They told these stories as they navigated many traumatic changes, the establishments of kingdoms, the threats of other foreign empires, the devastating invasion of the Assyrians who destroyed the northern kingdom, and the exile and the return from Babylon. And as they told the stories, to make them relevant to each new challenge, of course the stories changed. And perhaps by looking at those challenges, we might even be able to see how the stories were adapted to speak to them. Take, for example, the golden calf story. Assuming it wasn't just an account of a one-time event that took place in the Sinai desert, how might that story have taken shape amid the events that we know did take place in Israel's history? This is Retelling the Bible. Episode 10.14, A Visit to Bethel. During the reign of King Hoshea of Samaria, there lived a boy named Zabad of the tribe of Ephraim. Zabad was a good young lad who always listened to his parents and honored the traditions of his people. He would never forget the day when he was but a lad of 10 years old, and he went with his father and the rest of the family to worship the God of the people of Israel. The chief sanctuary, at least in the southern part of the country, was at a place called Bethel, the house of El. And there the tribes would gather for the high festivals to honor the God whom they called Elohim. As Zabad came into the place, he wondered at the huge numbers of people and the beauty and majesty of just about everything that surrounded them. The first thing that he saw was the great stone pillar that marked the entrance to the sanctuary. It towered over his head along the path, and his eyes widened at the sight. "Father," he asked, "who could have set such a stone in place?" "Only one man could have done it, son," his father responded. "It was set up by none other than our ancestor, Jacob, when he discovered the importance of this place, that it was a place where heaven touches the earth and God's messengers go forth. When he woke from his dream, in which he saw all of this, he was filled with such immense strength that he lifted up this stone. It reminds us of God's presence in this place." No sooner had they passed by this standing stone when another, even greater wonder entered into their view. There, in a small shrine on the edge of the plaza, stood 2 smaller stones. They were protected from the elements and had been ingeniously mounted on a stand so that you could walk around them and see both sides of them, for they had been engraved with writing on both sides. Now, Zabad could not read, so he could hardly make out the significance of these tablets for himself. But he also knew that few others had the ability either. And yet everyone seemed to be treating the tablets with such reverence. They would touch the letters engraved upon it, and then bow their heads and beat their chests in an attitude of contrition. Zabad only needed to look at his father, who immediately understood that he needed an explanation. This is the law that Elohim gave to guide the lives of the people of Israel. It was brought to us by Moses, the great lawgiver. But that is not the greatest wonder of the tablets, for they say it was not Moses himself who chiseled the words upon it, nor any other human hand. The words were written by the very finger of Elohim. And so it is that people come from far and wide. They come to sacrifice, knowing that we have not always lived up to the words of these commands. But they always come to the tablets to remind themselves that Elohim has placed himself among us through the words of the law. And so, just like so many others, Zabad reached out his hand in reverence. As his child's finger traced the line of one of the letters, he felt a strange tingle run up his arm and gasped in wonder. As a child, Zabad had not yet begun to learn all that the law required of him as a man of Israel. But he knew now that when he became that man of Israel, and he lived out those requirements, it would not just be an exercise of his human will. Living out the law would always be to him an act of making Elohim more present within the nation. All of these things had only taken place in the courtyard where the people gathered and the altar burned. But looming over the entire area was the temple itself. Constructed out of cedar wood, it was by far the largest structure that Zabad had yet seen in his life. There was a steady stream of people coming and going from the shrine. And so Zabad and his father had to wait for some time before they could go in. But once they had done so, Zabad knew that it had been worth the wait. There were only a few objects inside. There was a brass pole, sculpted into the form of a tree, that he knew was a representation of the goddess Asherah. There were various other pieces of furniture and objects that had been devoted to the god. But Zabad's eyes immediately turned to the central figure that dominated the room. It had the form of a calf, and it shone brightly in the light of the lamps that filled the room. It was made, the people said, of solid gold. This was the object that the boy had longed to come and see, ever since he had heard of its existence. As each worshipper came to stand before the calf, they would all repeat the same phrase: "Here are your Elohim, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." And as they stood there, Zabad's father indicated that he should bow and do likewise. The interior of the temple was not a place for explanations. But once they had exited, Zabad looked eagerly once more to his father, seeking the meaning of all these things. "Father," he said, "I know that this is a sanctuary of Elohim, but I do not understand. Is that calf an image of the God himself? For I have never been told that Elohim takes the form of an animal." "Indeed, that is so," his father chuckled. "And no, it is only fools who think that the calf itself is a representation of the God. For, as it is written upon those tablets, we do not create images of Elohim, because nothing in heaven or upon the earth could possibly capture the essence of the God. The golden calf merely marks the invisible presence of Elohim among us. It is God's throne and God's royal mount, but no, it is not the God itself." Zabad nodded with some understanding, though it did not quite make complete sense to him. "This is how it is with many gods," his father continued. "Down south, in Jerusalem, they say that there is a great temple on a high place that is dedicated to their God, Yahweh." "I have heard of that God, father," Zabad interrupted. "In fact, some people back home say that Yahweh is the same God as Elohim." "I have heard that too, son, and perhaps it is true. But if so, they do not worship the God in the same way. In Jerusalem, there is no calf, but rather a golden chest, and on top of that chest are 2 golden cherubim who provide a throne for the invisible Yahweh. But of course we know better. We know that Elohim prefers to sit upon a calf. But there's more to the story even than that. Because, you know, this calf, unlike the chest in Jerusalem, was created by the very hand of Elohim. A long, long time ago, in the days of the first king of Israel, the king designated 2 sanctuaries for Elohim in the land, one far to the north in Dan, and this one here at Bethel. The high priest of Elohim at the time, who was called Aaron, called on all the people to contribute gold for the creation of 2 calves upon which the god could rest. And they came and brought their earrings and jewelry, their cups and plates, and whatever they had. And Aaron threw it all into the fire. And out of the fire came this calf, and the calf that was placed in Dan." Zabad looked up in surprise. "What do you mean? They came out of the fire? Did no one shape them? Were they not poured in molds?" "Ah, you are a sharp lad," his father chuckled. "I can't get anything past you." "Yes, that is what they say. The golden calves were not shaped by human hands. They just happened. And so clearly it was Elohim who chose these calves to be divine thrones. They, just like the tablets over there, were divinely created. That is how we know that Elohim has chosen to abide in this place. And when these wonders had been achieved, and the calves emerged from the fire, Aaron called out the words that have become the creed of this sanctuary. Here are your Elohim, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Just a few years after Zabad's first trip to Bethel, King Hoshea of Israel rebelled against his overlord, King Shalmaneser V of Assyria. The Assyrians came and laid siege against the city of Samaria. For 3 years they camped around its walls, and all that time they plundered the countryside far and wide. By the time Samaria had fallen, nothing was left of what had once been a rich and prosperous kingdom. The Assyrians carried away the rulers and all of the leading citizens. They plundered the treasury and all of the high places and sanctuaries in the land. Zabad's family was not important, and their small landholding was away in the isolated hill country. They survived, though Zabad's father was killed in the fighting, and his uncle took on leadership of the family. Life was hard for the remaining Israelites as they struggled to make their plantings and produce enough food to survive, while paying the punishing Assyrian tribute. By the time that Zabad was able to lift up his head and take stock of what had become of the land, he was a young man and about to take a wife. But before he was ready to do that, he had one burning desire. He remembered the time he had gone with his father to Bethel. It was one of his fondest memories of the man, so he wanted to return there one more time before he began the next stage of his life. Bethel was a ruin. Nothing was still standing there. Not even the great pillar of Jacob, which was still recognizable, but had been violently pushed onto its side. The main site of the sanctuary was mostly rubble, but it still drew small numbers of pilgrims who had no place else to go if they wanted to worship Elohim. For yes, as Zabad learned by speaking to many of them, the same devastation had been wrought against all of the temples and high places in the land. Not one altar remained intact for the worship of Elohim, Yahweh, or any of the gods that the Israelites had known. The only altar that remained, and that seemed at all familiar, was far away in Jerusalem to the south. For the Judahites had somehow escaped the wrath of the Assyrian king, at least for now. Some pilgrims had even begun to travel to the temple of Yahweh there for the high festivals, even if it wasn't quite the same. Despite the grief it caused him, Zabad walked through the devastated courtyard. There was a man there, the son of one of the priests who had been killed by the Assyrians, who was telling a story of the destruction to any who would listen. He was in the middle of his tale and pointing at the place where the temple had stood as Zabad came up. The golden calf, which had been formed by the hands of the god, they took and they burned it in the fire, he was saying. All of the gold, as it melted off the sacred throne of Elohim, the Assyrians collected and molded into bars. When all of the metal was gone and only ash remained, they took the fine powder and threw it into the well of Bethel, so that any pilgrims who come to this place drink it until this very day. But at least they had some reason for destroying the calf. Everything they do for the sake of gold. With this, the storyteller directed the pilgrims to a small hovel on the opposite end of the courtyard. But there are the remains of the stone tablets that had been written with the very finger of Elohim. These they took and they cast them down for no reason that meant anything to them, laughing as they broke them into pieces. We have collected as many pieces as we have been able to find, and you may visit them before you leave. But no one will ever be able to read the words again. Sometime later, Zabad stood in the hovel. The pieces that had been collected were laid out on a flat stone. He reached out his hand to touch one of the larger pieces. But as he traced the shape of one of the few remaining letters, he felt no tingle. Nothing at all. The god, it seemed, was no longer present in the words. That night, Zabad approached the son of the priest who had told the tale of the destruction and offered to share some of the bread he had brought. The man agreed willingly, and for a while they sat and spoke of the various horrors they had heard of in the land over the past few years. The man told Zabad that he was glad to have met him on this day, for he had decided that he would soon leave Bethel forever. "I mean to go south," he said, "to go to Jerusalem. I want to tell my stories there, to tell all the stories of the people of Israel in a place where someone might appreciate them. Perhaps there someone will remember them and pass them down, for I fear that all our stories will be forgotten here in Israel." "Amen," Zabad replied. "Elohim has gifted you as a storyteller. May your stories endure forever." In the years that followed the destruction of the Kingdom of Israel, many refugees found their way south into Judah, which enjoyed some autonomy, at least until the next time the Assyrians turned their attention in that direction. And the stories that the refugees brought with them were appreciated. And eventually some scribe in Jerusalem took the trouble to compile them together onto a scroll. But the stories were not received without some alterations. There had been a long history of derision in the south for the worship practices in the north. Once or twice, a Judahite prophet had even made his way north to Bethel to condemn the worshippers there. So, the way it came to be told in the south, the destruction of the calf and of the tablets was not told as a tragedy, but as a punishment that had been well deserved. But at least the story was not completely forgotten. And given the scale of the tragedy that the Israelites had suffered through, perhaps that was the best that anyone could hope for. Almost a century and a half ago, a biblical scholar named Julius Wellhausen put forward a theory about the composition of the first 5 books of the Bible. He said that there were 4 main literary sources that had been blended together by later editors. One of those sources he called E, or the Elohist source, because it preferred to use the name Elohim for God. This source, he argued, had been composed originally in the northern kingdom of Israel, and had possibly been brought south following the destruction of that kingdom by the Assyrians. Wellhausen assigned the story of the golden calf at Mount Sinai to this Elohist source. His theory, called the documentary hypothesis, was so groundbreakingly brilliant that for over a century it was generally accepted by almost all scholars of the Bible. Today, that consensus has broken down. Scholars still agree that there are multiple sources, but have developed some different and arguably better theories about how those sources could have come together. There is also much disagreement regarding Wellhausen's dating of the process. I am no expert on such matters, but I do tend to think that Wellhausen was onto something when he located the origins of the golden calf story in the north. And so, to help you and me to imagine how it could have happened, I have told this story. There is one particular learning that led me to this story. I had always read the account of Aaron making the golden calf as a kind of self-justifying lie. When he says to Moses, "They gave the gold to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf," it has often been taken as an excuse. Don't look at me, brother. I didn't have anything to do with forming the calf. It just kind of happened. But the fact of the matter is that at that time, it was quite common to claim that any object that was used to make a deity present for worshippers had not been made by human hands. The ancient world was full of objects that, at least according to the official dogma of the local shrine, had fallen from heaven, come out fully formed from the sea, or had otherwise been mysteriously manufactured without human intervention. So it was when I noticed that both of the key objects in this story, the tablets written with the finger of God and the calf which emerged fully formed from the fire, are given the same patina of divine origins, that the germ of this story was planted within my mind. I know it didn't happen exactly as I've described it here, but I hope that perhaps my story might give your imagination a way to think about what it would have been like to pay a visit to the sanctuary at Bethel in the waning years of the Kingdom of Israel. That is it for this episode of Retelling the Bible. Join us again in 2 weeks' time for another episode that gives you a new approach to an old Bible story. The theme music for the podcast is Ada by Kevin MacLeod, and the mood music for this episode was Desert Night by Sasha End. The music is licensed in the Creative Commons and can be found at incompetech.com and at nd.app, respectively. You can contact me on Bluesky at Retelling the Bible and on the Facebook page Retelling the Bible. Show notes have been posted at retellingthebible.wordpress.com. Thanks to my Patreon supporters for your ongoing support, which means so much to me. Go to patreon.com/retellingthebible to join them in supporting this podcast. This is Retelling the Bible, and I have been your storyteller, W. Scott McCandless.